A thriving consulting business is built on a solid business foundation and a consulting code that leads you toward your ideal business and your ideal lifestyle. And the great thing about this code is that it works for any type of consulting practice, whether you help clients with professional development, business management, grant writing, IT, or something entirely different. This consulting code is not rocket science and is not beyond your reach. And when you crack the code, it can jumpstart the growth of your solo consulting practice and is what you need to know to get started and land your first clients and nothing more. This is a step-by-step process I wish I had so many years ago. And that's why I wanted to share this with you and how you can do this too. So if you're interested in starting your consulting business and creating a desirable offer to generate leads for your offer and to make sales, then the consulting code is your solution. Visit www.excelatconsulting.com for more information. Hello. Welcome to the Black Girls Consult 2 podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Angelina Davis, and today I am welcoming in Miss Dynasti Hunt, who is the CEO and founder of The Shift. She is a master at anything and everything regarding equity and anti-racism. She actually is focused heavily on making sure that this work is not just something that has a namesake, but really has an embedded place in the corporate structure. And I think you're going to enjoy this conversation today as we talk about her transition to consulting from her career, which was thriving in the HR world. And I hope that it will open up for you many ideas when it comes to making your mid-career shift into the consulting space. All right, it's a good one. Let's get started. There's a misconception that we don't exist, that somehow our ability to excel at the highest level of our industry is limited, that overcoming barriers as a woman of color would be insurmountable. But what would happen if we decided to venture out on our own despite everything we're up against? I'll tell you. Welcome to the Black Girls Consult 2 podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Angelina Davis, a healthcare consultant, consulting coach, high performance fanatic, wife, and proud girl mom. I help transform female professionals into thriving solo consultants. And just like you, I'm wearing all the hats and doing all the things. So this podcast is to empower the busy female professionals to move past fear to start and grow a successful consulting business, despite the obstacles you may encounter. We'll dive deep into consulting practice, business strategy, mindset, and more. So grab your cup of coffee or tea if that's your thing, and let's get started. All right, hello and welcome to the Black Girls Consult 2 podcast. I am welcoming in Dynasti Hunt. And I am so excited to learn all about the DEI world in your consulting business. So I want to start off first by having you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Great. So my name is Dynasti Hunt, and it is like the TV show. It's just spelled differently. So I always tell people that. And my business is all around DEI consulting. And I'm sure that everyone's like, but isn't everyone doing DEI consulting? And in a way, some people are. But I like to talk about my angle of the business being, how do we actually take DEI and operationalize it across your organization? So really thinking about it being a thought or something that feels like a short-term initiative to how do we make sure it's embedded in the core of all of your business practices?
Oh, I love that. Now, let's back up a little bit. I want you to share with us your definition of DEI in terms of how you see that playing out in our society as well as the corporate world at large. What's your take on it? I know everybody has a different view.
Everyone definitely has a different view around this. I think one of the things that I would say is, people are like, well, it's around like the diversity or the equity or the inclusion. I think they're all equally important. I think they all have different definitions of what they look at. But I like to talk to people about the E of all of this, which is the equity piece, because I think that if individuals in society as well as its organizations actually get the equity piece right, it actually leads to more inclusion. It actually leads to more diversity being included into an organization. Take, for example, you have an organization where they're saying like everyone feels included and we've got like a diverse set of people in the organization, but everyone feels like I'm not being paid equitably. I'm not being compensated in ways that beyond just pay, like benefits and so forth that really matter. I'm not actually being seen for my own progress in terms of growth across the organization, then inclusion doesn't live. And then it's like, well, if it's happening to more than one person that has the same identity traits that I do, then diversity isn't really true in the organization. So when I pull it apart, I like to talk to people about the E of it, because a lot of times I think that people skip the equity piece. And I think that is core to actually bringing the D and the I together.
Right, because I think equity is so important. We forget that equity is not necessarily making sure everyone has the same thing, looking at it from a different viewpoint and making sure that we each have, I don't know if I would say similar access or ability. You tell me how you would best describe the equity piece.
Yeah, I think there is something about recognizing that historically and now, even now, systematically, there are systems that have been set up to actually say that certain groups of individuals will have more than others. And if we don't acknowledge that and we don't address that first, then we're always going to be in a place where there's inequities that are happening. I like to tell people, there's this concept of like, people will say to me, well, it's equality. I'm like, no, that's different. Equality says that we're all at the same playing field. We're starting at the same line and everyone is going to get the same things. In order to get to equality, you first have to recognize that actually there's inequities that have happened that have been designed. So these have been intentionally designed to be set up that one group has more than another. And if you recognize that, you recognize, does everyone have the same starting line? No. There are people that have a line that's like 10 feet behind, and we've got to address getting those people to the same starting line, and then we'll have equality. So I like to tell people, like, when you're talking about this and we're thinking about this from a structure standpoint in an organization, equity, then equality.
Oh, I love that. And so much of this plays out in the consulting world in particular. It's one of the things that I feel so strongly about, because I feel as if we are definitely not starting on the same even and level playing field. And oftentimes when we go into starting a consulting business and trying to get our names out there, we rely on these systems that were not designed or built for us to succeed. And when we do that, it's almost as if you're handicapping yourself before you even start. And so it can just mean life and death in your business as to how you proceed and how you grow, just based upon that foundation that was actually set.
Oh, it's so true. And I think that a lot of people don't even recognize. I think about processes like an RFP process, for example. So someone sends out an RFP. Oh, yeah, it's a whole world, right? So like someone sends out an RFP. And I think about all the different hoops that I have to go through in order to prove that I'm adequate, that I can do the work, and it's an RFP, right? So I'm thinking like, oh, everyone's getting the same equal playing field, right? In an RFP, there's equality because it says, here's what we need from you to respond to the RFP. Great, I respond to that. But then when we get into the interviews, on multiple occasions, I have talked to peers who are not Black, just to be honest, like white women who have said to me, hey, you know what? Yeah, it was a great interview. And I'm like, you know what? They asked me for like 3 additional pieces of information. And they're like, oh, they didn't ask me for that. I was like, did it come up? Well, no. And so there's these assumptions around like what they have versus what I have. And even in an RFP process, I am having to doubly, if you will, prove myself. That's an inequity. But people don't realize that because they're like, but it was equal. We made the RFP transparent. It was open. Everyone knew about it. Sure. And then when you got to the interview process, there was still an inequity cause because there is still the stigma out there that we're not consulting, or like, of course, like on paper, like what you're saying can't really be your level of experience. And I get that more often than not. And it's frustrating to like prove myself beyond what's already there and the work that I've already done.
It is so true. And it's one of the reasons why you're talking to the person that is so like anti-RFPs for that reason, only because I tell people all the time, depending upon what type of work you want to do, especially if you want to go into government, you're going to have to go through those processes. But so often being on the other side of that table, you're right. There's so many blocks that exist. Half of the time, the business is already won by another individual through inside tracks. And just seeing the way the system worked over time frustrated me. And also acknowledging that a lot of our male counterparts, especially I would say cisgender white males, they tend not to go that process or go that route and will often get or win that business a lot faster. And so seeing that play out time and time again is extremely frustrating, especially when it's a system that originally was not designed to function that way. That's not how it's supposed to work. But because of the way things have gone unchecked for years and for decades, it's pretty much the system that has been built in a lot of instances.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting to watch like those systems, because now people will use those systems and say, but this is how we are bringing in DEI, because they'll use that and say, but we're being inclusive and we're trying to bring in everyone by being open about the RFP. But to your point, the business has already been won, or we already know who we're going after. We should just name that, be honest, and not say that other folks have a fighting chance or a fair chance, if you will, when they actually don't.
I don't want to leave this as a blanket statement, because we know that there are certain organizations that are out there trying to do it the right way, but there are so many that do not, and they fall into that trap of the status quo. We're going to play this game similar to how it's been played in the past, and therefore the inequities kind of continue to exist. So it's so frustrating on so many levels. But the great part is that I know through your work and through your business, you've been able to overcome this. Can you share with us what you found to be maybe your biggest success so far in your business or in your business journey, and what you're most proud of?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. I think one, I'm getting to the place where I'm really learning for myself how to do what people would call business development, or BD, if you will. So putting myself out there, reaching out more. And so that's been a journey for me. But on the back end of what's been successful is both continuing to share my own brain power, my own thought power. How do I think about things? So utilizing social media to share, here are my thoughts on this, or here's my angle on this, or here's how I approach this, has allowed for people to really get a chance to get to know me, to get to know my style, to understand how I'm going to show up, what the work is going to look like. And that has actually generated a good amount of business. Now, I know tons of people who are like, oh, my relationship with social media is so bad. And I'm like, I totally get it. And I also think that if you are looking to put content out there and you're not like me, where you're like, I can just slide into someone's DMs every day, that's not necessarily my flow. My way of sliding into DMs is to put really quality content out there that lives and that people can go and read. And then it's their introduction to me. So I have found that to be a really powerful introduction. I think the second thing has been referrals. You know, I hate to say it. A lot of people will say like, oh, we need to get away from referrals and consulting practices. But it's true. It's still true that once you do a good job, someone will refer you to someone else, or they'll know of your work, or they've worked with me before I started my consulting practice. So those become referrals that have been super helpful in the business. The last thing, you know, I will say is really being mindful about ebbing and flowing with my clients and being a little bit more fluid with what I do. So the way that I've been really approaching the work is I have a couple of different programs that I offer, and those clients have been involved in those. But as I work with clients and I start to dig in deeper, I can start to see like, oh, hey, this is actually where the gap is, and this is where we need to focus for a couple of months. And so I will say to them, hey, we're going to still do exactly what we said we're going to do, but let me make this adjustment for you because I can see where you're about to go or where you're about to head, and you don't want to head in that direction. So if I can get in front of it for you and help you, that's been super effective. And it's been a nice way of partnering with clients, because clients know that working with me, that I'm always thinking about that very next step, and that I'm not always totally married. I want to be, but I'm not always totally married to the original scope of work, because especially in DEI, it changes as you learn more and as you uncover more and you get into more roots. And you're not going to figure that out without me like assessing you for a year. So the other option is, let me assess you for a few months. And then as I'm assessing you, as I uncover things, let's have a conversation where I can be flexible enough to say, we need to edit this or move this slightly. Are you with me? Let's go on that journey.
I love everything that you said, but what stands out to me the most is number one, referrals. Referrals are so important. I think I spend a lot of time talking about not relying on referrals, but that's only because so many people solely rely on that and they don't know how to gain business any other way. And so for you to stay in business for an extended period of time, we just all have to be well rounded. But for referrals are priceless when it comes to building your business, attracting clients that already know what value you bring to the table.
Yeah.
You can't and shouldn't get around doing that part and making that a priority in your business. Like that is key. But then also I love this whole idea of you talking about the future and really thinking about how you can be more innovative and forecast what's coming for the clients that you serve. Because when we think about thought leadership, when we think about our expertise and how we're able to best serve our clients and provide value, part of that is being able to help them predict where they need to go and to lead them in that direction. I think so many times people rely on just focusing on the current problem and they're not thinking ahead. They're not thinking about the next step. They're not thinking where their potential client is going to go or their client is going to go. And therefore, they have nothing set up for them to continue to work together over an extended period of time. It becomes really just them delivering that one service instead of it really truly becoming a collaboration that can carry on for years.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also something about just like the sustainability of it, right? Like in my mind, I'll be honest, I am not necessarily the person where I'm like, I want to be with you for the next 10 years as your consultant. I want to be with you for maybe maybe like 3 to 5, maybe. And the reason why I say that is if I'm doing my job well in the way that I want to do my job and the way that I've built my organization, if I'm doing the job well, then I am getting out and you are sustaining the work without me and without any other consultant having to come in. Now, you might call me and say, I need a partnership, but in terms of like me doing it, and that's a real conversation that I think we have to have with our clients, because there are clients who are like, oh, well, can you just come in and like X, do this or lead this and do this? It's like, yeah, absolutely can, but I'm not setting the organization up for success, because then when I get ready to go, then people are going to be like, wait, she's been leading this on her own and implementing. She's the main implementer. What do I do? How do I carry this work forward? So really shifting to away from a done for you model to a done with you in very intentional ways, where there's a little bit of like train the team on how to think about this, how to approach this, how to do it.
That is the goal. If we don't leave our clients prepared and ready to move forward without us, then you're pretty much almost like serving like a contractor. Like you're coming in to do the work, but you're not really preparing them or advising them or strengthening their program to the point that it can stand alone. And then what that creates is this dependability on that business to continue to exist. Whereas if you go in with the mindset that you're preparing the business or the organization to stand on its own 2 feet, then you know that you need to continue to market, you need to continue to sell, you need to continue the aspect of business development that you were just mentioning, because it doesn't last forever, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think if you know that, then you can create a system for yourself around it. But if you're going in being like, this is my anchor client and they're just going to be with me for forever, you're going to have a lot of shock to the system when that anchor client suddenly is like, actually, no, I think we're good. Or budget cuts happen this year and what we did before, we're not able to do. And so I'm always saying to myself, Dynasti, you have to make sure that you are not anchoring in like one client and you're constantly thinking about how can I like anchor them in the sense that I'm getting them ready to always be ready to graduate. So I think about this, like, you think about like college, like professors are there and they come in and they teach the students, right? Like they teach them. And sometimes you get them in more than one class. So like, I think about that with my programs and like, okay, great. Maybe you get me freshman year of your DEI services. And then you're like, great, I need you sophomore year and junior year. And now senior year, I've got my capstone. And then you're ready to graduate. And then you move on. Like a lot of us are not, people didn't go to undergrad. At least I didn't go to undergrad and then be like, let me go back to undergrad again and go through all the same classes and get the same degree. I've moved on. And when I move on, maybe I go to graduate school. But if I didn't go to graduate school, I have enough to sustain to be able to do this work and to be in the job market. Same thing when I think about this work with organizations of like, how can I get you to graduate? And how can I constantly be thinking about if you graduate early, if you're like, oh, surprise, I took a couple of credits over the summer and I'm going now, what does that mean for my business and like the flow of clients that are coming in?
How did you actually get your start? Because I think this will be helpful for, listeners to hear so they can understand if they want to go into the DEI space and work at this level, how do they get there? How do they even think about getting their foot in the door? And what do you feel is important in terms of, if it's certifications or not, or connections that you need to make? Like, how do you get your start?
Yeah. I mean, so kind of backing up just a little bit. So my background is in human resources, talent management, and recruitment. So I've always loved that work. And that's really where I got my start in like the people world, if you will. And one of the organizations I worked with fairly early, I noticed that there were discrepancies in terms of how individuals of certain backgrounds were treated versus others. And they were happening across the human resources team. So I immediately, because of the role and the positional power that I had, not a ton, but there were some, decided, okay, we should work on like, how do we close some of those inequities? At the time, I wasn't calling it DEI. I was just like, we need to make things right across the board for different groups of people. That turned into the next role that I took on. Similar situation came up and I was like, this is coming up again. And me recognizing that because of the role that I was in, I could actually like really dig in and think about this different ways. So that encouraged me to start exploring DEI. And I'll be frank, I quickly found that like, I personally use DEI because I think it's good for SEO. I actually don't love the term DEI in the way that it's been set up by corporate America, because I think it's about checking boxes and being compliant and not actually like moving the needle. And I believe in moving the needle. So this is why I talk a lot about equity. This is why I talk a lot about anti-racism. This is why I'm like, is it really inclusive? Let's talk about what inclusion really is and what it really isn't to get people to understand. DEI may be the terminology that people know the most, but like when you're talking about these pieces of work, you've got to go beyond what corporate standards are for DEI. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute because that gets to my thoughts on certification or not. So I actually, in the work that I did in the next organization, said to the organization, we need to have more of a DEI lens. I'm already starting to embed it from an equity lens in the work, but we should start thinking about how we spread this across the organization. The organization was like, we don't have budget for it. And I was like, that's fine. I will take it on, as a lot of people do. Another conversation around like whether or not you should take it on unpaid. I think I would tell you later on in life, no. I was very young and green and like really excited about jumping in.
We live, we learn.
We learn. But I found that by doing that, it allowed for me to start to like understand the landscape of DEI more, understand more about my position of what I like, what I don't like about it, and to actually start to dig in and do more of the work. And that's really how my journey started. It wasn't a lot of certifications. It was more about how do we look at HR and talent and recruitment practices and recognize that a lot of those are outdated and very black and white and actually don't lead to inclusion for everyone because of how they're built. And how do we start to change those? And that is what led me into then more specifically leading DEI for a few organizations. But it's interesting. I've always like led DEI and led HR at the same time because people find out like, oh, Dynasti knows both and can do both. And it's been nice because there's a lot of, if you're using power right, you can actually change systems, change things because of the roles that you're in around people's systems.
Right. That's so true. And I know you said you're going to get back to the piece on certification, yes versus no.
Okay. So let me disclose. Let me share my disclaimer first. I am certified as a certified diversity executive, which is a high-level diversity certification. I am certified as an executive coach with the International Coaching Federation, and I have taken some certifications on ESG and so forth. All of that to say, I did that in the last 2 years of my career. I did not take these certifications early on because I really felt like the certifications, I think all the certification programs are great. Let me back up here. They're great, but they also teach a lot of things that I think lead to a very standard check the box, not forcing you to think outside the box in the way you might approach the work And that feels really scary to me because I think that people will go in and take the certification very early on in their career and then be like, but the book says this. But I can tell you that, again, the book, the systems, no fault to the writers, but like how we've designed systems and approaches have not been designed to include everyone. So if that's the case, we have to recognize that and recognize that a certification does not mean that we are ready to then go out and understand and implement systems and changes that are actually going to be equitable and inclusive. We have to do our own research. So I really pushed against for years. Like I never got HR certification for that reason. I took the course. When I took the course, I was like, this is real cookie cutter. I need to be able to think outside the box in this. And I need to be able to challenge myself and my team and my own thinking and work. So I found myself building my own courses and syllabus. I since got the certifications because I was like, well, it feels like it's time. Like I have done the work. People ask about them. So I get them more as something to continue to shape out and round out my expertise that I have, but not necessarily as the like way to go. Like, hey, I've gotten the certification and now I'm ready to do the work. I think those are two different things.
I love that because I feel like oftentimes we wait until we get these certifications, these degrees, and, whatever under our belts to feel prepared to do the work without realizing that you can already do the work at some capacity and then go back, depending upon how you view that particular certification or that degree as helping you to do the work in the future, you can go back and then pursue it at that time, which I feel like helps you make a better choice, right? Because number one, it's a huge financial and energetic investment. So you know that you want to do it by that time.
Right. And there's something about your values. Like my values say that I want equity be something that's clear in all the work that I do. Do I get it right every time? No. Am I human and imperfect? And there have been times where like, oh, I really messed that up 100%. And I will own that. But I allowed my values to really be shaped and formed first in my work before I, went out and did a certification and then allowed the certification to tell me what I should value or how I should approach or do the work. And again, I think, the certification that I've gotten, this is no, rub on them. I think they're high quality, really strong certifications, but I do worry that people, to your point, are like anchoring in those and like waiting for those to be able to say, I can do the work. And that doesn't immediately translate. Like what you read in a book and study in order to get ready does not necessarily translate into how you actually execute and show up on a day-to-day and lean into this work in your organization.
Right. It definitely doesn't. Where do you see your industry going in the future? Like, what are the opportunities that you think lie ahead for anyone who is interested in going into this space?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was just having a conversation with someone last week who was talking about like, is DEI gone and obsolete and now we're moving to ESG? I'll be frank. And for those who are like, ESG, it's like environmental, social governance, all wonderful terminology. This just reminds me of what we did with human resources, where human resources was personnel, then it was human resources, then you got organizations calling it talent, then you got organizations calling it people operations. And I'm like, all the same stuff, all the same root cause issues still need to be addressed. It's still like the name is just different. So I see that for DEI, where people are like, DEI is now ESG. Sure, it can be, but at the core of it, it is still the same core stuff that we need to fix. And we're just putting a new name and a new bow on it. So I feel like DEI, the industry at a large, is in a place where we really are going to have to move to a place and in a direction of how are we actually going to operationalize and move the needle. I feel like we're still talking a lot of theory. We're still talking about a lot of emotions, and those things matter. But it also matters to figure out, how do you actually embed it into an organization? How do you actually bring it to life? If you look at the books, if you look at articles, we're just now seeing in the last couple of years that more people are starting to write about, here's how you actually, in a practical way, place this in an organization. And I think that more organizations, more consultants, more leaders in the DEI space are going to really have to shift their thinking from a like, let's talk about the emotional side of things, keep that, But now we got to talk about how we embed it across every single part of our business and not just HR, right? Because we see a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, well, we just need to like make sure recruitment looks different. Yeah, no. While you're over here trying to change recruitment, which everyone is doing, have you actually gone through and looked at your budget and had a conversation with your finance team? Because if you look at your budget, I had one organization really quickly a few years ago say to me, oh, we're totally equitable. And I was like, let's talk about your budgeting process. And they were like, our budgeting process? And I was like, yeah, who are the budget line owners? Like, who owns budgets in the organization? Primarily cisgender white men. So these individuals are the people making decisions. I was like, then let's look at your line items and let's look at where you're spending dollars, who you're promoting within those budget items, who you're developing, what programs you're launching within those line items. And you look at those, and the money was primarily going to homogenous groups. Those are the conversations that DEI professionals have got to have and get out of the lane of just like, oh, we're just going to talk about like a vision statement and we're going to make sure things look different from a recruitment or HR perspective and get into, no, I want to talk about your program. I want to talk about how you're doing client services at organization. Let's dig in and talk about how you're working as an engineering team. And are you building certain tools or AR measures that actually, encourage exclusivity versus inclusivity? Those are the conversations we're going to have if we want to see DEI really be sustained and actually be embedded across teams.
That's so true. I work as a healthcare consultant, and we actually in our group held a annual symposium every year. And one of the speakers that we invited in this past calendar year, was a DEI specialist in healthcare. And so they did a talk on a lot of the inequities that we know exist in healthcare and just how they show up even at the bedside. And it was so interesting to me because there were members that were part of the audience that really saw a lot of the examples that, were shared as being somewhat, I don't know if you want to say picky, or they didn't quite understand how it can influence care for patients that are coming in and trying to be served equally in a setting such as healthcare. So there is such a huge need, like you said, outside of just HR, because there are so many touch points that we have with the customers or clients that we serve that matter, where DEI plays such a huge role.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think people are missing that. And to your point of like, oh, it's being nitpicky. I'm like, but it's not. You have to examine. We have to recognize that all these little approaches that we're talking about, all these little things actually add up and make up the systematic issues that, again, have been designed in a certain way. There's a really great report called the groundwater approach. And it talks about this idea that like there's one fish in a lake. Well, that fish in the lake, maybe the water isn't contaminated. But if you start to recognize that half of the lake is, half of the fish are popping up and in the lake, and they're like, oh, well, maybe half of the lake is contaminated. But then if you start to look and you look at like 10 lakes and all 10 lakes have the same number of fish on one side, all popping up, that side of the lake is contaminated, we got to look at there's a system. And so a lot of times what you're talking about is people are like, but that's just one fish, and not recognizing that one fish is part of a bigger ecosystem that we have to address. And that means we have to examine every single part of our business. We have to question it. And we have to then start to even ask the question, where does this come from? I did an employee handbook design. I've done several over the last few years, but the very first one I did years ago was with my own team. And one of the questions I asked them was, I was like, okay, let's just answer this question. Why was it designed this way? And, we're like going through, well, why, answering the 5 whys, trying to get to the root. We finally got to the core and we go, well, our handbook is written the way it is because we got it from our legal team. Our legal team got it from their entire firm. Their entire firm got it from another firm. That firm got it from another firm. And this is just the standard template handbook that nobody has questioned. So there are inequities in it, but nobody's questioned it because it has been the status quo. It has been what somebody designed, and it is carried forward from generation to generation to generation of organizations. And no one has stopped to go, wait a minute, have we examined this? Have we looked at this? We are recognizing that we think we're just that one fish with our one handbook, but that one handbook is connected to a larger ecosystem. Those are the types of things that we have to really understand and recognize that it's not nitpicking when we can take on the lens of this is connected to a larger system.
It's so true. It's so crazy how one person's idea or thought or perception carries on for generations just because no one questions it. It just kind of becomes this standard and everybody feels like it needs to be done this way. You don't need to deviate because we've been doing it forever.
Yeah, like we should go back and question everything. Like, who came up with reference checks? Who came up with we need to have people do like, like a whole like case study for an interview? Like, who came up with that? And if we start looking back, a lot of those things are tied to one homogenous group or one person who decided, I'm going to make this decision. Everyone else was like, great, that sounds good. Let's keep going. And nobody stopped to question it. But as nobody stopped to question it, got bigger and bigger. The inequity got bigger. And we didn't realize that that person designed it to actually support certain groups and exclude other groups at the very core of it, because we haven't questioned anything. And it can be hard, right? As an organization, I tell organizations all the time, this is why this work is an ongoing journey. Because I also am not telling you to question everything at once. That would be like me saying, like, you have a 2-story home and I'm going to tell you to go clean out and reorganize every room right now. And we're going to have a group of people come in and we're going to literally pull out everything out of the drawers, out of every single room, put everything on like tables, and then tell you to go in and clean it up and fix it. You are going to be fixing it for forever. But instead, if I say to you, like, okay, let's go to this one room and let's go uncover, dig up the roots, like figure out what's in your drawers, organize it. Don't put all the same stuff back in there, because if we put the same stuff back in there, we're going to lead to the same disorganization. But let's pull everything out of the drawers and really understand like what needs to be thrown out, what needs to be kept, what do we not have that we actually need in order for this room to feel organized and equal, if you will, kind of connecting the analogy. That is the work that we do. And that's why it takes so long, because you're going to room. And then the last piece to this is you've gone from room to room and people go, I've gone from room to room, we're done. But, life happens, right? By the time you finish that last room, habits come in. Yeah, old habits creep in. You're like, oh, yeah, I know I said I was going to have it cleaned up and I organized it. We're going to keep it straight. But everybody goes through this, right? Like spring cleaning. You're like, I did this last year. And I come back and I'm like, I thought I cleaned this up and it was organized. But it's not maybe as messy, but there are new things to clean up and reorganize. And so you go back to that room every year and you're like, okay, what's the next thing that we need to do to make sure that we keep the room clean and straight and equal? That's this work.
We have a lot of women, especially definitely women of color, that tune into the podcast. Yes. And they find going into this consulting space to be a challenge on a number of different levels. And because we're not going to let that hold us back or slow us down, I wanted to see if you can share with us maybe some ways that you've been able to navigate the industry in a much more effective way. How have you been able to overcome some of the challenges that you face?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I did not leave my full-time job immediately. So I knew that I wanted to consult full-time. And I had just made that decision, but I also made a choice to like build relationships. So what I did was, and this can't happen for everybody, but I was really transparent with my organization about where my desires were from a career standpoint, and that I wasn't checking out. This wasn't a tomorrow decision. We've got a few years, but I need you to know where I'm going. And when we think about my professional development, let's think about like, what are the things that I need to learn or to understand in order to make sure that I'm good and prepared to lead my own practice. That happened to be a consulting organization. So it worked out really well that I was able to have that conversation and then start to learn some of the ins and outs of the business. The second thing I did was I really started to build relationships with people outside of the organization. So networking, building meaningful relationships. So when those first couple of consulting projects came, they were small, and they were small enough for me to say, I can do them on the side while I'm still working full time. And so I did those on the side while working and continued to build my practice. One thing that I have told people though, because people have said like, how do you like leave your job, and do you have like money available? Are you like ready to like really take that leap? I actually spent time taking on smaller projects that I could sustain while running, being in my full-time role. And I would take those dollars, and instead of banking those dollars, I reinvested them back into the business. So that's where I was taking coaching classes. That's where I was getting certs. That's where I was building out my website. Any dollars I wasn't necessarily putting back into the bank. I was like, let's do that. Let's build a website. Let's build templates for my business. Let's make sure we have a brand. And so when I did leave full time and go full time, there were a lot of operational costs that I didn't have to absorb that normally you would starting a business that would put you in the hole. And so I wasn't in the hole leaving because my job was to just focus on the clients that I had accumulated over the time of getting ready to leave and starting to build those relationships.
Definitely. I always say that oftentimes your 9 to 5 can be your first investor. It's a matter of how you're able to use not just, like you said, the money, but then also the opportunity to see firsthand how to run your business, those things that you need to take with you, what you need to leave behind. I would sit in on legal discussions and contracting and you name it. I always tell the story in my instance of one of the key moments where I had the realization that it was time for me to officially start my business was when I was actually going through a review for a contract that we signed and just seeing the value that I was bringing to the table. It was so eye-opening for me. So I do think that oftentimes people don't take full advantage of where they are currently because we may be excited about leaving. You never want to stay in a place where you're completely unhappy. But most often, it's usually a situation where you can make a more seamless transition. It doesn't have to be so abrupt. You can actually transition and grow your business and move into that space of entrepreneurship without, kind of everything falling apart. I think we hear those stories about how people lost everything and was sleeping on their friend's couch and going through the grind. And there's something to be said for that. And I think those stories are always inspiring, but there's so many more people that I think also show just as much resolve to get their business started by taking this more intentional journey so that they're able to build their business with a certain level of stability.
Yeah. And I mean, think about it this way. I go back to that senior capstone analogy I shared earlier, make it your senior capstone, take a year and really dig into okay, this is what I want to be doing outside of this organization. What are the things I need to learn, to your point of sitting in on legal discussions or contract agreements? What are the things that I can learn and build my own little syllabus for that I can, what I'm doing while I'm working, build your own syllabus around this. And the other thing I would say to people is, be smart about how you're positioning yourself in the organization, because I've seen some people say well, they should pay me for this. I'm like, no one's going to necessarily pay you. They're going to pay you to your job. They're not going to pay you to leave the organization, right? So additional that you want to do it knowing that the benefits of that are twofold. To your point, then you understand how contracts work. You understand how legal works. You understand how negotiations work or business development works. But the second thing is if you're working on your business while you're in a job that is similar to your business, that allows for you to have additional expertise. I did so much stuff in my last couple of years that were really beneficial to the team and the organization, and I wouldn't do those any differently. But those same things that I did helped me, because now when people are like, can you help me with this? I'm like, oh yeah, I did this in my own organization before I left. So when I'm talking to you and consulting you about certain things, I'm not talking to you from a place of theory. I consult from a place of practicum. And I'm able to do that because I started to look around my organization and say, what do I need to learn and have on my resume, if you will, of things that I've learned how to do? And simultaneously, it's something that the organization needs. So really sitting down and being really specific about actually, what are the actual activities that connect to the work I want to do that allow for me to get that exposure to and help the organization that I'm in? It's a win-win on all sides.
Right. Because at the end of the day, this is something I always tell clients that I work with. At the end of the day, you're still doing your job, which is what you're being compensated for, right? That is the expectation. You're performing that expectation. You're actually going above and beyond by doing this additional work. The difference is that the benefit to you is not necessarily in the pay. Like you said, it's in the experience. It's in you being able to build your, I would say, whether you want to say portfolio or, your experiences that will match the business that you want to create, that'll allow you to be able to provide more value in the long term. There's so much to be gained from doing that. Number one, you don't even have to find the people that you want to work with, right? They're given to you. And it doesn't change the work that you do and the outcomes and the results that you're able to generate. The only difference is that in those instances, you don't have to go through the process of marketing or sales, right? Those individuals are there for you. So, if you kind of follow that process, then the major lift that you have outside of your job becomes more so on the traditional business side in terms of how do you do that by attracting your own leads and marketing your services and being able to sell your offers, et cetera. But you're able to do so much of the testing and the training inside that job. It doesn't have to be separate.
Absolutely. I tell people this all the time. I'm like, do not check out too early. It's like, do your job, do it well.
Yes.
Because those folks can also be referrals for you later on. But I see too many people checking out too soon. Oh, I have this whole other business idea and I want to do that. And I'm like, great, take the lead, but recognize like right where you are is a gold mine. If you look at it and you position it that way, you have to some people, you have to reposition your mindset around it. But if you can do that, you can then be able to apply that to where you want to go next.
And also it helps you to have the protection of your job and that financial stability while you're figuring things out. It's always great to try and see if you even enjoy doing some of the work, because sometimes what you think you may enjoy or the type of, work that you want to do, you'll find out something completely different.
Years ago, I thought I wanted to do solo career coaching. It's like, I'm going to help people with resumes because people always sent them to me. So I was like, I'm really good at it. And so I tried it for a while on the side. And I was like, oh, I'm not enjoying doing this. This is not what I want to be doing with my day to day. I've taught fitness classes for a number of years. I retired, if you will, in 2020 with the pandemic. So about 3 years ago. And I love teaching fitness classes and I love the work that I was doing. But when I would do it, I would recognize that that is not something that I want to fully invest in. I did not physically want to be doing that day in and day out. So I also tell people you might think you have the idea and then you go out and you test it. It's kind of like that restaurant where you keep hearing it's so good, it's so good, it's so good. And then you go and you're like, yeah, it was overrated. I think more people would do themselves a really good justice if they actually went out and whether they even pro bono. I'm not encouraging people not to get paid, but if you really can't find paid work, offer it to an organization pro bono and say, I want to work on this project because I know it's going to be helpful to you. And because I need to decide, am I going to enjoy doing this? And if you don't enjoy doing this, you have saved yourself a load of time and trouble from that next thing. I used to joke because I do coach leadership teams and individuals and organizations. And I tell people all the time, I really wish we had a 90-day policy, even within organizations, where you could get promoted to another job and you could try it on for 90 days. And if you were no, you could take it back and let me go back to my old job and try something else. And I'll let y'all know when the right thing fits. Because sometimes we get into these roles and then we're like, that isn't it. It's the same thing with a business and a consulting practice. And you don't want to leave and then feel like I left. It wasn't what I enjoyed. Now I've got to go back into something that I equally don't enjoy in order to figure out what's next versus taking the time to test, prototype, move things around with how you're working, be flexible with yourself around what you might try to do, and then build upon that. And I did that. And I got to the place where then I was like, okay, I have a model that works for me. I have a model that I really enjoy. And then I also had clients that I really wanted to engage with on a deeper level, and they were ready and I was ready. So when I left my job, there wasn't a 2-week break for me. I left my job on a Friday, and the very next Monday, I was in my calendar was full. My family was like,
I love it.
Your calendar is full. Wait a minute. You're not and I was like, no, because I wanted to prove to myself. I also wanted to prove to myself that I could get to a certain level of sustained income before I walked away, and that I would generate enough business and that I had enough contracts ready to go. And so I had told my job, I knew I was getting close. And so I'd given my job a 6-month notice, and that 6-month notice in addition to them knowing that I was going. But that 6-month notice helped me to prepare them for me to leave, but then to prepare myself for like, great, because I've told them I've left, that's a free 6 months technically that I have to really get on the ground and say, hey, I'm going to be ready in May. Are y'all ready in May? Let's like anchor this up. And that's how I built it.
Oh, I love it. I love that so much. I mean, it sounds like you were definitely beyond intentional with that strategy, and probably one of the reasons why you've been so successful. When we take our time, things will work out. I always have to say that. Take your time. Don't rush. When you're rushing and when you're desperate and you need the money, you just make a lot of bad decisions. And I think when you're able to
feel that, where you're like, I'm desperate, I need this money, like people can feel that. And I never want to be in a place, if I get to the place, and I've always said, here's my backdrop. I've always said, like, listen, I'm smart, I'm experienced, I've done a lot of really great stuff in my career. If it doesn't work, I can easily go find a job for a while. I've never not, taken that off the table. I'm not like, I'm totally into my business. But if something goes wrong or something wild and crazy happens one day, I can always find another job. But having that mentality, I think helped me even more, because then I was like, I do not want to be out there like, oh my gosh, I have to have this contract in order to make it or survive. And so that meant for me being really smart about like my expenses, what I spend money on, what I don't, what I invest in and what I don't, but to also be really smart about, let's make sure that I'm not rushing out into situations where, because I want the contract so bad, I'm taking anything. It's not work that aligns with me. It's not work that I really should be doing. It's not where my gifts are. Really, that should be somebody else's contract. So all those things start to seep out, and people can feel that. People can feel when you're like so focused on like, I want the money of the contract versus helping them. And I've always said, in this work, like I meaningfully want to be a true partner to every organization that enters into an agreement with me. Like I want to go deep with them because I think that makes a difference. And I think that means we do different work. But in order to do that, I can't be desperate. I can't be so focused on what they're going to pay me that I miss that. I will say this for those who are listening, I also can't be not so focused on what they're going to pay me that I let them pay me pennies, because we have a problem with that too, where we allow people, we're like to nickel and dime us. And I'm like, no. Go get your coins, go name what you're worth, go out. And really quick story, I didn't do that for a client that I worked with. And I kind of like lowballed a number because I was like, well, I don't know if they're going to work with me. And I lowballed this number and they were like, great. And we signed this contract, and I kid you not, it had to have been maybe 30, 40 days later. It wasn't that long. They're like on LinkedIn sharing how they just won this like huge second round series of new funding. And it's like, it's not chump change. Like we're talking like billions of dollars. And I was like, oh, no. So this is this, right? Because I was like, it's about like the work that I want to do. And it's so value added. And I care so much about the people. And you do, but you also should get paid for your expertise. And that matters too, because I walked away from my organization earning a 6-figure income. I walked into my business making 6 figures in that very first 9 months of business, because I was like, I am not going to make those same mistakes. I'm not going to overcharge you, but I'm definitely going to ask for what I'm worth and what I'm providing you.
Oh, definitely. Because at the end of the day, the more profitable your business becomes, the more you're able to do in terms of achieving your mission and your goal and really living out your purpose. One thing I always tell people, at the end of the day, people will pay for what they want to pay for. I think oftentimes, especially when we have businesses that are purpose driven and we have goals and missions that we see as being far beyond ourselves, we can sometimes, like you say, believe that we're doing work that is not as valuable or may not be as regarded as highly by the clients that we want to serve. And that really is not true. It's really a thought error that we have, because people will pay for whatever they value. If they value clothes or a car, or if they value a particular service or working with a particular brand, they will pay for it no matter what they have to do. So I think it's that reminder to ourselves to, like you said, charge what we feel is appropriate for the work that we're providing, and keeping in mind the return on investment that we are providing to that organization. So they can't reap 100-fold and you get paid pennies. That's not going to work, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that kind of keeping that in mind is so important for all of us. So look, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I do want you to tell anyone that's listening a little bit more about your offers, who you serve, where they can find you, all of the things.
Absolutely. So you can find me at dynastyhunt.com, and I use all the same easy profiles on LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. You can just find me at Dynasti Hunt. And again, it ends with an I instead of a Y. I know people get that confused. They're like, where is she? And I'm like, oh, it's because you got the name wrong. And the programs that I offer are focused on really thinking about how do you build that foundational DEI infrastructure. So we have a program for taking you through a 1-year program where we spend a deep time with organizations saying, how do we actually build that foundational DEI infrastructure that you can sustain and build upon over time. And then secondly, we have a second program that we launched this year that is focused on HR teams and how do they start to look at their DEI practices and embed those from an operational lens into every single part of the human resources, or sometimes people call it the talent management lifecycle. So we love working with teams who are a little bit smaller. If you are a team that's probably over like 2,000 folks, may not be the right focus for us, because we want to get in there a little bit early and really make sure that we're helping to build the anchoring systems. But we'd love for you to reach out and connect with us, because I've got a couple of people on the team who love doing this work as much as I do. And we are deeply committed to making these partnerships something where we truly are a partner for your business.
Well, I have truly enjoyed talking to you today. I know that everyone has learned so much about DEI, starting a business, how to navigate it as a woman, especially a woman of color in this space. And I just want to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to the Black Girls Consult 2 podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to leave your review on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and share it with a friend. We're on a mission to increase the success and longevity of women in consulting, and you can help us do that. Also, I'd love to hear from you, so let's connect at Dr. Angelina Davis on Instagram or LinkedIn. And don't forget to visit excelatconsulting.com for more information to support your consulting journey. Until next time, take care.